Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Epic Vision Zone. Jane Applegath here, founder of the Epic Vision Zone, Conversations That Inspire. Every show, we offer you an inspiring person or message to bring you closer to your big dream so that you can live your epic life now. Thank you for being here. Melinda Gates wrote, "A woman with a voice is, by definition, a strong woman, but the search to find that voice can be remarkably difficult." Author, speaker, life leadership coach, and strategist Becky Burroughs spent most of her life setting high expectations, driving herself into the ground, denying her feelings, and hiding her fears. Then she experienced a full-blown identity crisis when both parents died, her marriage ended, and her job changed within a short span of time. Facing multiple life transitions simultaneously, she began a quest to learn how to navigate them so that she could enter the next chapter of her life in a healthy way. A champion for others, Becky now empowers women to find their true identity, know their worth, and use their voice. She shares what she has learned so that others find their clear calling, a strong passion, and a definite purpose that will withstand each chapter of life. She is a best-selling author of her book, Come Back Home to You, Navigating Life's Transition and Embrace Next Chapter Living, as well as her collaborative book, Elevate Your Voice. Welcome, Becky. Thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you, Jane, for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Well, we're excited. And oh my gosh, your story is so poignant. I can relate to it a lot. And I'm sure there's many here that can as well. So give us an idea of, I can see what inspired you to do the work that you do, but where did you find on your quest that aha moment? Just give us some insight into your personal transition.
Well, you described in your introduction kind of what I went through, just a bunch of what were for me very traumatic events that all happened in a very short span of time. And as I was grappling with them and realizing that each of those things that happened to me was worthy of grieving, and I wasn't really sure that I knew how to grieve. For some reason, had always reserved grief for death. I didn't realize that anything major that happens to you that involves any kind of loss is something that's worth grieving. So I knew that first off, I had to learn how to grieve. Secondly, I had this fear, a very, very deep fear of becoming this bitter old woman. I knew what she looked like. You know, she had this permanent scowl, and her life ended the day her husband died, or the day he walked out the door, or the day she discovered she didn't have purpose anymore, whatever it was for her. And I thought, I don't want to be that woman. I've got too much life left in me. The women in my family tend to live to be in their mid 90s to into 100. And so I thought, I got 30 years or so left. What am I going to do with it? So I decided to really learn about grieving, learn how to grieve. And I read a lot of books on grieving and adopted what I call resilient grieving, that idea that you go through this process. Grieving is not an event. It is a process. And you've got to trust the process. And if you do the hard work of grief and you respect the purpose of grief, you can come out of it with a beautiful, meaningful life that in some ways can even be better than it was before. And so that really drove me to figure out how to get through this really tough period of my life. I call it a full-blown identity crisis because for me, that's what it was. I was like a lot of women that when you say, oh, tell me about yourself. Oh, well, I'm a wife, I'm a mother, I'm a this, I'm a that. All these labels that hint at roles and responsibilities and titles, but they don't really tell me who you are. And that was the way I had identified myself my whole adult life. And then all of a sudden, all that stuff one by one was stripped away. And I thought, okay, maybe that's not who I am. I've got to figure out who I am. And so that kind of inspired that quest, that journey that I've been on.
Wow, that is so insightful because Becky, I think we all live there. When someone
Mhm.
asks you, who are you? And especially as we get older, because we don't get asked that question that much,
No.
but it makes you pause, and you're right. Your labels, it's all labels. It's you think of your work, you think of your responsibilities at home, the wife, the mother,
Mhm.
um, and when you take away those labels, you really go, wow, who am I? I've been living labels all my life, and my identity is not, that is not who I am. And it's very interesting because in Europe, when you ask someone who they are, they don't reference themselves as their profession, whether that might be, a doctor, a lawyer,
Mhm.
a fashionista, whatever it might be. They tell you about themselves. So it's
Mhm.
really an interesting event, and I can totally relate to that. And that is such a deep dive, and what a journey! Oh my gosh! Strip away the labels and tell us who you really are. And you know what? I bet you get most people that they don't know what to say. I'm just guessing, but
They
I can
don't.
feel that.
And, and the labels have value because the
Mm-hmm.
labels point at what matters to me, what I value. The
Mm,
very fact that I mention those things tells you that I value those things. And yet, and I'm a coach. And so, what I coach women to do is don't erase the labels. That's where you spend your time. That is what you value. But we need more. So, for
mm,
example, one of the things I encourage women to do is talk about what matters to you, what you value. So, for example, instead of saying, I've been a teacher for 30 years, tell us what you value about education. Tell us
mm.
what you plan on doing after you retire as a professional educator, where you can still live into that value in some way. And I think that you're right. The Europeans have it. They get it a whole lot more than we do. But the culture of this country in particular is very driven, very goal oriented, very achievement, very accomplishment oriented. And so that kind of drives how we tend to see ourselves. And so what happens when you get to be mature in years and you're no longer anybody's wife and your children don't need you anymore and you have retired? That's why so many of our retired folk are walking around feeling invisible, like they
Mm.
don't have value anymore, that they don't matter. And it's because they haven't figured out, who am I at the core?
Right.
In spite of all the titles and roles and everything, who am I and what matters to me? And that really changes and morphs over the years. I'm not the same girl I was when I was 40 or 30 or even, or 10, because I am a product of my experiences and my value system, and all the things I've been through in my life.
Mm. Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. Well, you may have touched a little bit on this question, but you say you begin with inner work. Tell us
Mhm.
what you mean by that and the four main inner blocks.
Okay, I'm happy to, because I'm very passionate about it. I I work a lot. So right now, my full time job is in ministry, and I do the coaching on the side. And so, since I've been doing this for many years, and I've been in nonprofit world for many years, that's the majority of who I coach: women who lead in ministry and nonprofit. Because overall, these are very much behind the world, very much behind what the world is doing. So, for example, in the corporate world, women are running corporations and they are in high levels of government and advancing in those areas. But in ministry and in nonprofit, it's not nearly that way. Women are just now beginning to crack the glass ceiling in those areas. So I do a lot of work with women who want to tell me, well, so and so won't let me do this, or my church says I can't do this. And those are what we call outer blocks. Those are things that no matter where you live or where you work, there's always outside forces that potentially are trying to hold you back, or tamp you down. Those will always be there to some degree. And you may or may not be able to do anything about that. But what you can do something about are those things going on inside your head that are holding you back. And so I talk about the four inner blocks. The first one, and the most powerful one, being the inner critic. We all have an inner critic, but we all vary to some degree or other as to how much attention we pay to our inner critic. The inner critic is designed to keep you safe. But very often in doing so, your inner critic also keeps you small and insignificant. So, for example, it won't stop by saying, don't cross the street, you'll get hit by a car. It goes on to say, don't say that, You'll sound stupid. Don't do that. You're not good at it. Don't try that. You'll fail. And again, we vary as to how much attention we pay to it. So, one of the things I encourage people to do is separate the inner critic from yourself. People don't tend to think, well, my inner critic is telling me not to do this. What we tend to do is, I don't think I should do this. I don't think I'm good at it. And the reality, that voice is coming into your head. So I even encourage people to give that inner critic a name, separate it from you. It's not you thinking this, it's this inner critic that's out of control, that you've given way too much agency to, that is feeding this to you. I had one woman tell me that she gave the inner critic the name of her mother because it was always her mother that was overly critical of her. Some people picture their inner critic as this grotesque monster. My inner critic is me as a 4-year-old child. I was a very, very fearful little girl. And I remember being in school, not raising my hand. I knew the answer, but what if I'm wrong? So I didn't raise my hand. Sure enough, my answer would have been right. I can think of so many times throughout my life I didn't try something because of fear. And so what I encourage them to do is, once you give that inner critic a name, to say, well, I would like to do that public speaking event, but little Becky tells me I'm not a good public speaker. And there's something about separating it from you. It's like somebody else is trying to tell me what to do. So my message to little Becky is, you know what? We're going to go ahead and do this thing, even if we have to do it scared. We're going to do it. Mm-hmm. And so that is the most powerful inner block, is the inner critic. Another one is the assumptions we make. So, for example, your spouse, you want your spouse to do a certain thing, but you don't ask him because the last time you asked him to do it, he did it wrong. So you assume he's going to do it wrong again, so you don't even ask him. And we go through life making assumptions about people, sometimes based on past experience, but sometimes just based on our fears. And we never really know. We never really give that person an opportunity to say or to do or to be what we need, because we've decided before we've even tried, it's not going to work out, so I'm not even going to try. The third inner block are the stories we make up. This is a phrase that Brene Brown uses, and it is completely, there's several different ways to refer to the stories we make up, but I like what she calls it, because there's something powerful about me saying, you know, Jane, I know we had this interview scheduled for today, but the last time you and I were scheduled, you were late. So the story I'm making up is that you're going to be late again. And we think about all the stories I tell myself that aren't true, but yet I believe them. There's something about me saying it in my head. The story I'm making up is that you didn't call me because you're mad at me. I really don't know why you didn't call me, but the story I'm making up is you're mad at me. And so I teach people, use that phrase, and it points out the absurdity of your thoughts. You haven't verified it. You don't know it's going to happen. You don't know if it's true. But when we make up these stories, we believe them and then we act on them. So I think you're mad at me, so now I'm mad at you, even though I don't even know why you didn't answer the phone, kind of thing. The fourth inner block are limiting beliefs. Now, unlike the first, which tend to be about me, that limiting belief could be about me, or it could be about you or anybody. For example, I could have a limiting belief about myself. I could say, you know, women at my age don't go back to school. And so I can't go back to school. It's just not done when you're my age. Well, that's a limiting belief, right? Or a limiting belief would be, a woman will never be president of the United States. Well, I don't know that because we've got a vice president right now. But deciding ahead of time the limits of what I can accomplish or what someone else can do. And these things hold us back because we tend to believe it if we're thinking it. And so one of the things I tell women is, don't believe everything you think, because those thoughts aren't always coming from wisdom. They're more often coming from fear. And if I can think something and allow fear to back, then I don't have to step outside of my comfort zone and try and take a risk and try something.
Right. Yes, those are so powerful. And thank you for bringing those to the forefront, because it's the awareness. It's understanding, like you said, that, okay, now I'm aware that that's just my inner voice, and I can separate myself from that and do something to take action, whether it be, you know, going and doing that public speaking event, or not believing, like you said, the limiting beliefs, et cetera, et cetera. Yes, those are all things that hold us back, but great insight. Thank you so much for sharing those. Now, the next question I love. It says 3 steps to becoming your mindset boss. Tell us
Yeah.
about this, because we're heading in that direction. So give us an idea of how we
Yeah.
become our mindset boss.
And so the reason I call it becoming the boss of your mindset is I'm working with women who are leaders or they aspire to be a leader. And I believe that before you can even begin to be the boss of someone else, you got to be the boss of yourself. You've got to be the boss of how you choose to think. And so becoming the boss of your mindset begins with, as you said a moment ago, and I appreciate you using that word because it's the word that I use, awareness. Aware that, okay, so let's say I have one of these thoughts. Let's say the thought I have is about someone else. You know, I text you, you don't respond to me, so I decide you're mad at me. And so rather than get myself all worked up on why are you mad at me and what have I ever done to you? And or I think I know the reason why. And so I go off into this fantasy conversation with you and it turns into this whole thing. And now I'm upset with you because I think you're mad at me. And all you did was you haven't responded to my text. And so what I need to do to become the boss of my mindset is to first recognize this is an inner block. The truth is, I don't know why, fill in the blank, in this case, she didn't answer my text. I'm making this assumption that it's because she's mad at me. Where did I get this idea? So I begin to question and to challenge these thoughts that I'm having. Where did I get this idea? Well, maybe I got this idea because when I'm mad at people, I don't respond to their texts. Or maybe I got this idea because I'm afraid that that thing I know I said to her, I thought it was going to make her mad. And so that's been weighing on me. And there's all kinds of reasons why or where I could get this idea. But then to ask myself, so if I believe this, how is it affecting me? Well, it's making me miserable because I'm wondering what I should do. I'm wondering how I can fix the situation. I'm wondering if we'll ever be friends again. So these out of control thoughts that I'm having based on nothing, the only data is she hasn't answered my text. That's the only data. The rest of it, I'm making it up in my head and it's affecting no one but me. It's tearing me up. And so if I can react to this belief that I have formed, what new belief can I form to take its place? Well, I can, and to me, I believe that those new beliefs, in the absence of data, if I don't know for a fact why in this case she didn't answer my text, then why don't I make up the most generous assumption possible for my own benefit, for the sake of my own mindset? So I say, okay, so what are some of the reasons why she wouldn't respond to my text? She hasn't seen it, or she doesn't have time right now. Maybe she wants to wait till she can devote her full attention to it, or she forgot about it. How many times have you read a text when you were busy and you said, oh, I'll respond later, and then you forget? And so the more I go down that path, I can think of many reasons why she wouldn't respond to my text. So for my own control of my own mindset, I'm going to go with one of those until I have reason to think otherwise. And so that's just an example of how you can become the boss of your mindset. Acknowledge that what you're thinking is a mindset block, challenge that belief, and come up with some alternative ways that you can think until you have more data.
Yes, it sounds so simple, but we are
It does.
complex. We are complex beings. And I often say that we make life more complicated than it needs to be. And, our imaginations can serve us in a very good way, but they can also
Yes.
serve us in a very bad way, which is the road that the story you were telling us. Absolutely.
Exactly. And your strength is also your weakness, right? So
Yeah.
imagination is a beautiful thing, but
Mhm.
we do have to rein it in sometimes. And this is not a one and done. I am not by any means suggesting that do this and you won't have any inner blocks anymore. I'm saying do this every single time you have an inner block, because you will
Right.
continue to have them over and over again. But if you adopt this pattern, then your body will begin to kick into it naturally, because you've done it so many times. You've challenged the thought or challenged the belief. And so it takes a lot of practice.
Yes, I was just going to say that. I always say life is a practice. And as Joe Dispenza wrote in as the title of one of his best-selling books, Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself. I mean,
Yes.
that's what it is, because when you're right, when you repeat it, when you
Mhm.
rehearse it, as he says, then that becomes your automatic, not the other. So it's true. Everything is a practice. And well,
Mhm.
thank you for that insight. And it brings awareness to us as well, because we need to practice, because we always tell her, and of course we all know that everything goes to the negative, because that's just the way our reptilian mind is wired. So,
Right.
yes, continue practicing, and then one day it will just be automatic. It's fantastic. I love it. So, you write, you are an imposter of the real deal. What does that mean?
So that gets into, I had an identity crisis. And as I began to discover or try to figure out who I am, I realized that there were ways in many areas in my life when I was not being authentically me. And not that I was being fake, but that I was not fully living into who I feel like I'm called to be because of either cultural restrictions or because of stories I was telling myself about how a woman ought to behave or conduct herself, or the things I ought to do or ought to say. And I began to explore who I am and what I value. Then I began to question, well, what values am I living into? The things I say are important to me. How am I demonstrating that? And if not, why not? So to me, being an imposter is trying to live into what other people's opinions of you are, how they think you ought to be. Being the real deal is being who you authentically are. And you can't be that unless you've come to terms with who that person is. And I think it changes as we get older. As I said a moment ago, I'm not the same person I was 30 years ago. And so the things she valued, because she had 4 young children at home, and she valued a lot of things that had to do with family and raising children. Now that I've completed that, I'm looking at other things. I'm looking ahead as to how do I want my golden years to be. And so I'm beginning to value different things. So it's important for me to live into those values. So it really is about discovering who you are and then living into that.
Yes, absolutely. We too often live in our imposter being, and we often wonder why we're out of alignment or why we don't feel
Exactly.
right. And it's because you're not living into as you say, the real deal. And it's funny
Yes.
because one gentleman, uh, he's a wonderful doctor. He's done a lot of work on this, but he says you are not depressed, you are unfinished. And his whole work is based on not discovering who you are. And that's
Mm.
why you have these issues. That goes a lot deeper, but he's done so much research and work. And it's fascinating because, in a way, what you're saying is when you're living the imposter, you're unfinished. The real you is not living its full life. Yeah,
Yes, and
absolutely.
we all know people who have left marriages and left jobs because they said, I feel like I've lost myself. I can't be me, as if that
Mm,
other person
yes.
or that profession is the reason. When in reality, I've come to believe that when I was not being me, it's because I was not fully living into my value system. Now, sometimes you might be in a marriage that is such that you can't live into, or you don't feel like you can live into what you value in the marriage. Same thing in a job. But it's not the marriage or the job itself, it's that somehow you have gotten away from what you value. And when I am not living into what I value, I'm unsettled. I loved it when you
Mm,
use that expression. And I think too often we think I must not be in love anymore, or I must not like this work anymore because I'm feeling so unsettled. I would push back on that and say, maybe, but let's first explore, are you living into who you are? Are you
mm,
living into and fully honoring those things that you value? Maybe that's why you're feeling unsettled. Maybe you've spent so much time doing this thing here and ignoring this over here. You need to figure out a way to balance that out so that you can be fulfilled as a person, honoring those things that you value.
Absolutely. Oh, that is so rich. I love it, Becky. Thank you for that. Well, here's something that we could all use today, especially with what's happening in the world. How do we get joy back into our lives?
That's a question I asked myself when I lost all joy, when all these
Mm,
things happened. And I began a quest for that. And it began the weekend of my 59th birthday. My son, who's a physician, he was at that time getting ready to interview for fellowship positions as a cardiologist. And he called me one day and said, Mom, I'm going to be going to these interviews. My wife can't go because she's a teacher and a coach. Would you want to go? Because he knows I love to travel. And what woman is ever going to turn down the opportunity to travel with her 30-year-old son? It just doesn't happen. And I said, yes, I'll go anywhere. And he said, well, we're going to Hawaii. So we go to Hawaii so he can do this interview. And we got on the plane and he turned to me and said, Mom, I think you're adventure deprived. We are going to cram as much adventure as we can into this weekend. And he had a half a day interview. And for the rest of the interview, for the rest of the weekend, we snorkeled and ziplined and segwayed and parasailed. It was just this adventure overload. And it was the most exciting thing I had ever done. And I began to write it down in a journal, everything I was doing. And I said, you know what I'm going to do? I want to do 60 fun, new, or interesting things by the time I turn 60. That gives me a whole year to do it. And so when I got home, I realized, well, I can't keep up that level of adventure because I'm not a thrill seeker. So what else can I include? And since my categories were fun, new, or interesting, I included anything that fit one of those three categories. So I could go to a new restaurant or try a new dish or read a good book or have a good dinner party. No thing was too small or too insignificant to mention. And then when I went on a trip, every single thing I did went down as a different category. So it was a year later. I'm looking to see how many I had listed. I had not listed 60. I had listed 600 because
Oh,
I discovered that whatever you are looking for is what you will find. And I was looking for joy. And there's something about setting your eyes and setting your mind for looking for joy. You will find it everywhere. So, since I did 600 in a year, I thought, you know what? Bet I can do 7,000 by the time I turn 70. And so I have continued this journaling. I've got a whole big container of all my journals, and I don't even remember the number I'm on right now. And it doesn't even matter because I've discovered that the secret to joy is gratitude. And this journal that I
mm,
did not intend to become a gratitude journal became exactly that because I was listing things that for me were fun or new or interesting. And I was grateful to be experiencing them. And so it has brought all the joy back into my life. And I even, a few years ago, had a friend call me and she was hitting a milestone birthday. And she said, I'm getting a tattoo. Would you get one with me? And I just said, yes. Had never wanted a tattoo. I had no idea what it was going to be. So I get on the internet and I start looking for all these pictures. And I have very small wrists and I wanted it to go on my wrist. And all the pictures I liked were too big. And I finally decided I'm a words person. So I began to look up words and I said, what is one word that means fun, new, or interesting things? And there is no word in the English language, but there are other languages that have a word for that. And I chose the word they use in Denmark, hygge is how I would pronounce it, Hygge. And they came up with this concept of hygge many years ago because in Denmark, in the winter, there's 1 month out of the year where the nights are longer than the days, and it's cold and rainy, and it tends to bring on cloudy moods and depression and everything. So they invent this idea of hygge, and it's really an atmosphere that you create. So it includes things in your home like a warm fireplace, a comfy chair, a cozy blanket, a good book, comfort food, a scented candle, soft music, good friends, a warm drink. And and so when it would get really nasty outside, they would make sure they had this hygge atmosphere inside their homes. And I thought, that's it. That's the word I want tattooed on my wrist. And so I went on to have this word tattooed on my wrist. When I wrote my book and I self-published, I named my publishing company Huga Publishing. And it is a word I keep in the forefront. I've got it all over my house. Just the word to remind me to find fun, new, or interesting things every day that I can be grateful for so that I can be filled with joy. And I make a distinction between joy and happiness because happiness is dependent on what's happening. This good thing happens. I am so happy. Oh, this terrible thing. Now I'm mad. And then I'm happy. And then I'm mad. But joy comes from within. It is a state of mind. And you can be joyful in the midst of suffering. You can be joyful in the midst of grieving. And so that's been my quest for joy.
Mm. Oh my gosh, that's incredible. I love it. Oh, and you're right. Gratitude does have the highest vibration as far as and words go as well. So how you
Mhm.
associated that with what was happening and your quest for joyful things because then you were grateful that you had experienced it. And I love that your son said,
Exactly.
"Mom, you're adventure what did
Deprived.
he deprived." Oh my
Deprived.
gosh.
Yeah.
That's right. We're all adventure
Yeah.
deprived, if you want to put it that way.
But
I
you know what?
love
But
it.
I did not see that. In fact, at the time that he said it, I didn't even know I was seeking adventure. And for me, the definition of adventure is doing things I've never done before, going places I've never gone before, meeting people I've never met before. It's newness. And we tend to get in our ruts and in our comfortable people and places and things. And when he said that, that really got me to thinking about what is adventure for me? It's not the same thing that's adventure for everyone. And when I wrote my book, I write a chapter about this. And one of my readers, who's my age, read it. And she said, you know, Becky, not everybody wants to see the world. I am very comfortable sitting at home. So I had to go back in and tweak my chapter to include what other people consider as adventure, like a long nap or a television show you can lose yourself in. You know, we're not all the same. We don't all seek the same things, but just me personally, that's what I seek.
Yeah, no, it's probably just the word adventure because you're right. We associate
Yeah.
that with something thrilling, something, that you're never going to forget. But you're absolutely right. And I love it. I think that's fantastic. Well, thank you for sharing that. Now I've got to start my adventure slash joy journal. I,
Yes.
yeah,
Yes, you
because
do.
even going out for a cup of coffee at a different coffee shop, I love that. It's just,
Yeah.
I wouldn't call it an adventure, but I'd call it whatever you want to call it. I understand the feeling that it gives you. It's absolutely, something that we all appreciate when we allow ourselves, when we give ourselves permission to do it. Therein
Yeah.
lies the catch, right? Because
Yes.
it's like,
Yeah.
oh no, I should be working. Oh no, I need to do this chore. Oh no, it's giving us, and that of course adds on to the joy because you are giving yourself permission, which is self joy, self care, whatever you want to call it. So, oh my gosh, we could go on a whole episode with that for sure.
Yeah.
Well,
Yes.
here's definitely a question that I think a lot of women suffer from. What does it mean to be a people pleaser, and how does it affect your life?
Well, I can speak from the outside looking in because I have never identified myself as a people pleaser, but I come across more women, I think, who are people pleasers. I've met some men who are, but certainly women are. Because as women, we often want to be helpful. We want to serve. We want to do. We want to be remembered for what we provide. And that's just our nature, I think. And I don't know why that is, and it's a wonderful quality. The problem, though, is when our motive is to please people. It's like that hamster on the wheel. There's just never a moment when you're going to please everyone. That came home to me when I was about 20 years ago. I was a high school principal at a Christian school. Thankfully, my kids had graduated, so I didn't have to be their principal. But I'll never forget. Again, my son was in college, and I would have hated to be his principal. It would have been awful. But I called him up and I said, "What advice would you give me as someone who has recently graduated from high school?" And without much thought, he said, "Mom, I want you to think you've got three categories of students. You've got the kids that are going to do the right thing no matter who the principal is. They're going to study, make the good grades. They're not going to get into any trouble. Top of the kids, right? Then you've got the kids who are constantly going to be pushing the envelope no matter who the principal is. They're always going to be living on the edge. They're not going to come to class. They won't do their homework. They'll get in all kinds of extracurricular trouble. Your job is to try to reach the middle third. Those are the kids that could be influenced by the attention of a principal. And when he said that to me, knowing how I'm wired, because, I tend toward perfectionism, right? And I'm not going to be happy unless I've reached them all, unless I've infected them all. When he said that, it gave me permission to not have to be all things to all people. I just got to focus on those that I can impact. And I began to take that wisdom and apply it to other things. You get up to make a public speech. Not everyone's going to like your public speech. There's going to be some people in the audience that already know everything you're saying. There's going to be others that are surfing on their phone. You want to reach that middle third that you can impact. And when you start thinking like that, my job is to reach, and that third thing is not scientific, right? It's just in other words, a segment, a portion. And then I took that and even expanded it to my sphere of influence. I don't have the capacity, I don't think anyone does, to influence everyone, but we all have people within our sphere of influence. So I may not impact this person on the other side of the world, or this person that doesn't relate to me because of our difference in ages or stations in life or whatever. But I do have a responsibility to impact those in my sphere of influence and focus on that. The problem with people pleasing is we are not happy when we are people pleasers unless we've pleased everyone. So we put our own needs aside, we put our wisdom aside, and we get on that hamster wheel trying to be all things to all people. And it's impossible. And so you completely use up all your energy for something that can never be attained.
Right. Yes, absolutely. And that is such wise advice from your son. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It takes me back, and I say this often, to the Rumi saying that says, who you seek is seeking you. So you make that
Yes.
connection, right? And that's the third, as you put it in your story, that you would make the impact on, because they are
Mm-hmm.
seeking you.
Yeah.
So yes, so vital to understand that, because you're right. And if you do try to please everyone, you will just be disappointed. I mean, then you go down a whole nother,
Always.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And you don't want to live that way, for sure. Well, here's a
No.
big question. Tell us how you
Mm-hmm.
help people find their identity.
It's a very personal thing, because I think how we disconnect with our identity is a very personal thing. I think for many of us, our identity is tied in this culture in particular, our accomplishments, our roles, identities, our titles, our responsibilities. And so peeling back those layers as to how we got there and why that's important to us. And then going back and going back. I like to go back to a value system. I think that's really important, identifying what matters to you, and it changes over the years. And so, um, again, it's a very personal thing. And so it's hard. There's no one size fits all as to finding your identity. Honestly, as we talked a moment ago about dealing with identity blocks, and the step one is awareness. We're intelligent human beings. And if somebody says, Becky, that's all well and good, but your identities, your titles and roles and responsibilities are not who you are. And so take that off the shelf, and what's left, many of us can come up with what's left. We've just never thought of it that way before.
Right.
So thinking about my values, thinking about how I like to spend my time, thinking about my natural giftedness. I'm a believer, so I go back to, how did God create you, and what gifts did God give you, and how have you been using those gifts? And so we just began to explore those kinds of things and try to fashion a new identity that includes the titles and roles and responsibilities if you want it to, but goes beyond that as to why those things matter to you and how you live into those things and your favorite aspect of those things and how you are growing and what you are learning. And so those are general things we do.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. I could see that it is definitely an individual, and it's really
Hmm.
something of exploring and going down that journey. Because once we mature and we get into our jobs and we get into our responsibilities, all of that goes by the wayside because we get on, as you call it, the hamster wheel, and we don't
Hmm.
give ourselves the opportunity to say, okay, I've got this title. Why am I doing what in that job title matters to me? And maybe there's nothing that matters to you, but you just got into that because maybe it was a good paying job. Maybe it was something that your family always, wanted you to get into, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, it really does require some digging. But I love the fact that you say that, all in each of us we partake in things that we enjoy, but we
Hmm.
never sit down to explore the why behind it. So,
Yeah, and I think
ask,
it's things we enjoy. Excuse me. I think it's things we enjoy and things we're naturally good at. I had a
yes.
woman that I was coaching say, I feel like that God called me to be a social worker. And I said, maybe, but let's talk about the gifts required to be a social worker and the things you enjoy about it. And as she began to talk, she finally decided that the thing that mattered the most to her about being a social worker is advocating for people who can't advocate for themselves, in particular,
Mm,
in her case, children.
right.
And I said, okay, so someday when you decide not to be a social worker anymore or you retire from that, how will you use that giftedness then? Because to me, that
Mm,
is a broader calling that in this phase of her life, she is using it in the area of social work, but there are many other ways that she can advocate for people outside of that one profession. And we often do that, right? We go to college and we major in one thing and we do it for a few years. And then 20
right.
years later, we're doing something totally different. But we can go back and trace the giftedness that is still in play, even in the different profession.
Yes, absolutely. It's a journey of discovery. That's what
Uh-huh.
life is, a journey of
Yes.
discovery. Absolutely. I love it. Well, here's something that many women feel guilty about. Speaking of women,
Okay.
self care. What advice would you give them?
First, I would ask them a question because women, I do ask this question a lot of the women that I coach. What do you do for self care? I remember one group, I was doing a group coaching thing, and I asked them this question, and one woman said, "What do you mean by that? What do you mean by self care?" And so I gave some kind of broad definition, and she said, "Well, I go running every day." And to her, that was the extent of what she needed to do because she was thinking of her physical body. But to me, the important thing when you think about self care, care of yourself, if it's not your responsibility, then whose is it? I mean, when you were a child, it was the responsibility of your parents to care for you until you reached an age where you could care for yourself. And now, if you are an adult, it is your responsibility. It's like driving a car and not doing anything to take care of your car because all you're thinking about is how it's supposed to get you from point A to point B. That's the most important thing is the car has to get me here. And then all of a sudden, you haven't changed the oil in it since you bought it. You now need a new engine. And you're like, well, I don't understand why it doesn't work anymore. I don't understand why, because you didn't take care of it. We get that when it comes to our possessions, but we don't get that when it comes to our health, when it comes to our well being, when it comes to ourselves that it is my job to take care of me physically, spiritually, mentally, emotionally, socially. It is my job, nobody else's, to make sure I do those things. And the degree to which I'm willing to take care of myself will determine how well I can fill in the blank, take care of others, if nothing else, do my
Right.
job, live into my values, live my life. And so the main reason to take care of yourself is because it's your job. It's nobody else's responsibility to do that but yours. And so, I often give the example. I think it's a worn out example, but it's the best one I have. When you get on an airplane and the flight attendant goes through the whole thing about when when the air oxygen thing drops down, put it on yourself before you put it on your child. And that seems so counterintuitive because we think I can hold my breath. I want to make sure my child can breathe. But what they know, and this is every airline in every country throughout the world, they all say the same thing because they know how quickly things can go south if you don't have oxygen. You will be no good to anyone if you don't put that on yourself first. And yet, as parents in particular, we sacrifice and we sacrifice and we do without to the nth degree because we want our children to have everything we didn't have. And then we look up and wonder why we are wrung out and only a worn out facsimile of who we were created to be. I'm a much better person when I take care of myself. I'm more fun to be around. I'm kinder. I'm more patient. All of these qualities that I want to have are there in abundance when I take the time to take care of myself. It's when I don't, and my body is suffering and my mind is suffering, that I wonder, why am I so grumpy? Why does no one want to be around me? And it's because I've depleted myself. So I see it as not really an option. It's essential. Now, it's going to look different in different seasons of life, for sure.
Yes.
But it is absolutely essential.
It's recharging. We need
It
to
is
recharge. Yes, recharge. I mean, we all get run down. I mean, whatever the case might be, but you're absolutely
Yeah.
right. We need to fill it up, and we fill it up with the premium gas or whatever.
Exactly.
Not the
Exactly.
substandard. You just got to treat yourself like a queen sometimes, and then what happens is you joyful because there's another thing that you're grateful for, and then you just become the magnet and you start giving to other people. It's a domino effect. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and the convention is that's easier to understand at my age. When you're
Mm-hmm.
young and you abuse yourself, you neglect what you need, you're young, so you still feel okay,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you can go a lot longer denying yourself when you're
Right.
young. But how much you do that when you're young determines your quality of life when you're older. And so when you're older and you're now reaping all the lack of benefits, when you didn't take care of yourself when you're young and it's now all come home to face you as you're older. Now it's so evident now. Oh, well, I can't do that. I've got to rest this weekend. I mean, we get it now. It's so hard for young people because they still feel kind of good. And so they don't get what the big deal is when they eat
Yeah.
poor, bad food and don't rest and stay up all night and all that stuff. And yeah, two blinks and
Yeah.
they'll understand it. Right?
Yeah, it's human nature, right? I was there.
Yes, we
I
all
was
do
like,
it.
yeah, well, I feel great. Nothing's ever going to make me
Yep.
old. Whatever. Boy, that would be the
Yes.
secret key, wouldn't it? That you could get the young people to really understand it. But we all come around sooner or later, right? Let's hope
Yes, we
sooner
do.
rather than later.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I love your spirit, Becky, and I would love to understand what your philosophy on women's leadership is today, because that is something that is shifting in a big way, and it's something that the
Mhm.
world needs. So give us some insight.
Yeah, the world does need it. And I think the thing that I try to encourage women to do is, first of all, to see yourself as a leader. I
Mm,
encounter this a lot because I am working in the ministry world and the nonprofit world where there are also a lot of what I call high capacity volunteers. And because they are volunteers, they don't see themselves as leaders. But the beauty that women bring to leadership is that we get it. We get the fact that leadership is not about power, as we're often told, it's about influence. Yes, there is some, if you want to look at it as power, there is some power associated with being a leader. But more than that, it's about responsibility. It's about influence. It's about who are you developing? This is the question that I ask women when they do identify themselves as a leader is I say, okay, leadership is not about how many followers you have. Leadership is about influence. Who are you developing to be a leader? Because that is the responsibility of leaders, to have an eye out for the next leader and to begin getting them ready for leadership. And so I think it's also important for women to understand and accept and embrace the fact that our leadership looks different than if you get a room full of men as leaders, you're going to get a certain characteristic of leadership. You're going to see, because just the way men are designed, you get a room full of women, leadership's going to look different. There's going to be more emotion. There's going to be more feelings associated. There's going to be more intuition. There's going to be more thoughtfulness. And yet it's still a very strong, powerful leadership. It just looks different. We have got to embrace the female type of leadership and quit trying to emulate the male style of leadership, because I think we're doing ourselves an injustice because we bring a lot to the table. You know, Ruth Bader Ginsburg said that a woman should be in the room everywhere decisions are being made, not to try to act like and emulate the men, but to show the different viewpoint, the different way of seeing things, the different approach that we can take. I often wonder, had women been in the room back during World War I and World War II, would we have gone to world wars? Would things have happened differently if women could have been a part of the conversation? We'll never know, except for moving forward. But to embrace, here's how leadership looks in me. Here's how God has gifted me to be a leader. I was I was coaching a group last week, and this woman who was the leader, there was a group of 8 women, and only 2 of the women were employed by the organization. The rest were volunteers. And so we were talking about, what qualities of leadership do you feel like you have in abundance? And what qualities of leadership are you lacking and you need to be working on that? So as she's talking about herself, she started naming the areas that she's not really good at, as if she needed to get good at it. And I said, if it's within you, sure. But if not, then get the right people on your team. You don't have to know how to do all of the things. You've got to know how to get the right people on the bus. That is being a good leader. You think every CEO knows how to be a CPA? No, they hire a good CPA. Does every CEO know how to do sales? No, they hire a good salesperson. And so getting the right people on the team so that together you are this complete cohesive team is the hallmark of a good leader. And so honestly, with women, and I'm not necessarily talking about women in the corporate world, because they've been fighting this battle for a long time and they've made great strides. But I am finding that in other areas such as ministry or education or nonprofit, we're dragging our feet on accepting and honoring women for their unique leadership style and for their individual leadership giftedness. And so that needs to change.
Yes, absolutely. I love what you said, that it's about influence. That is so key. It's not necessarily it's not the hierarchy where you say, I have all the power and this is what you're going to do because I say so. No, it's about influence. And it's also about leading ourselves as well.
Absolutely. Gets back to being the master of your own mindset.
Exactly. There you go. Right back to that. So that was wonderful. Thank you so much. Tell us about your podcast now and where listeners can find you.
Okay. So my podcast has not started yet. It will start at the 1st of 2024. It's going to be called Leadership Becomes Her. And it's simple, strategic solutions for Christian women who lead. And even though I target Christian women because of the unique challenges they face, the principles in there are going to be good for anybody who is either in a leadership position or seeking one, or who is not ready to accept that they already are a leader. You don't have to be making the big bucks or have the title to go with it. But if anybody's listening to you, if you have influence over anybody, you could be the leader of your friend group. Right? You could have 3 women who are friends and there's one who's kind of leading the pack. You're a leader. If you're a parent, you're a leader. And so we need to embrace the leadership and again, the unique qualities of a female in leadership. And so it'll be called Leadership Becomes Her. I don't know yet all the places that it will be available. I know for sure it'll be available on Apple's and iTunes and YouTube. So I'll keep you posted.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for that. And we'll have all that information available on the Epic Vision Zone bio pages as well. So I'm really excited now. You have got your book, Come Back Home to You. Tell our
Mhm.
audience about the book because it sounds fabulous. And I think it's already a bestseller, if I'm not mistaken.
It is an Amazon bestseller. Yes, I am so excited about it. I think it was number one in midlife management, and it was considered best new release in midlife management for about the first 2 months, which is quite an achievement. I was very, very proud of that. So I wrote the book, and it was published in April of this year because I wanted to take the things that I had learned through my own journey of all this stuff I had been through, and I wanted to figure out a way to help somebody else. I thought, I can't be the only one. This has got to be something that we all go through major life transitions. And I define a major life transition when it's something that happens that for you is so significant, it changes you. You're not exactly the same anymore for having gone through that. How you change will be up to you. And so I wanted to write a book that would not only share my own personal journey, my stories, but also some coaching principles so that you could not just survive this thing you went through, but you could learn how to navigate it so that you could thrive in the next chapter of your life. In the last chapter of the book, I interviewed, I just can't remember how many women, about their major life transitions. And I asked them all the same questions. They told me what they went through. And I would say, questions like, what was rock bottom for you? What was the turning point for you? What did you learn about yourself? How did you grow? What advice would you give others? And it was all kinds of transitions, such as death and divorce and retirement and layoff. And as it turned out, some of the divorced women that I interviewed were also victims of abuse. I interviewed women who had lost children, who had lost children in utero, women who had been through the IVF experience, which I knew nothing about, but I learned is its own thing. It is so traumatic. And as I interviewed these women and asked these questions, I wanted to protect their anonymity. So I lumped their, I focused less on their stories and more on their answers to the questions. So I felt like that would benefit the reader more. And so, for example, all of the divorced women, I lumped their responses in one category so that if by chance you knew any of these women, you didn't know who said what. That was really important to me. And what's been so amazing about this book is as people have been reading it and writing reviews on it, I hear over and over again, they couldn't put it down. They felt like the book was written just for them. How did you know my story? And of course I didn't, but it just confirmed for me that we're all so similar. We all go through major life transitions and we're all grappling, trying to figure it out. Even those major life transitions that we expect, like empty nest. I mean, you have that baby, you pretty much expect that 18 to 20 years later, that child's going to walk out the door and try to make it on their own. And even though you expect it, when it comes, you're not ready. So I talk in the book about how to prepare for things, even though you're not going to be ready, you can be prepared for them, things that you can do to prepare. And so I was just very, very pleased with how the book turned out and the response that I've gotten. And in the next few weeks, it will be available on Audible. I spoke to a young mothers group about a year ago, and I was telling them about the book, and they were so excited. But they said, we don't have time to read. We got babies. Please put it on Audible. And so I made that a personal goal. And so I'm so happy to report that's going to happen before the end of the year.
Wonderful. Oh my gosh, that sounds amazing. I think what the book entails is it resonates with so many individuals because, like you
Yes.
said, all of us go through different life experiences and many times we feel alone. But
Mhm.
really, we all have similar stories one way or another, and we can learn from each other, which is exactly what you're doing, the work that you're doing, and the work
Yes.
that you are doing because of your quest. So that is such a gift. And as I mentioned to Becky when we first before we got on, was this would make a fabulous Christmas gift for anybody that you feel would resonate with this book. So be sure and look
Yes.
for it on Amazon. And now, because we are on the Epic Vision Zone, Becky, I have one last question. If your
Okay.
life were an if your life were an epic story, what would the title be?
The title would be She Was Afraid, but She Did It Anyway.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Absolutely
I have spent my
perfect.
whole life battling fear. And yep, that would be it.
Yeah. That I could see the cover. I see a big cliff with your foot hanging over it. I don't know why that visual just came into my head. And you got wings coming out behind you. You did it
Yes.
anyway. Yeah, that's what
Yes.
they
I
say.
jumped out of that
Take
airplane.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Yeah. Take the leap and your wings will find you for sure. Well, thank you so much, Becky, again for joining us here today. And for information and to connect with Becky, you can go to the Epic Vision Zone bio pages where you will find all of her contact information and then some. And be sure to follow me on Instagram at Jane Applegath. And don't forget to connect with me at janeapplegath.com, where you can access and download the Creative Power and Vision Play Sheets. Sending you much love and triumph. This is the Epic Vision Zone, transforming your dreams into epic success.